Good afternoon and welcome to the June 17th, 2014 televised portion of our monthly work session. This morning we have present Mr. Al Widener, Mr. Scott Limpy, two authorities on capital budget. We'll also be discussing the Northport SCTI location, which we're all very excited about. But before we get started, I want to welcome Mrs. Ziegler to her first workshop. The way we do things a little informally at a workshop is that we have presentation for the workshop, and then at any time that you have a question, let me know and I will call on you. Sometimes it's good to wait till the end to ask questions, and we will kind of rotate around and not have one person ask a zillion questions at a time if possible. So let me know. I will call on you. We do this a little more informally than we do when we're on the board, and that is the process that we usually use. Today we're at a shortened event. Normally at most workshops we start at 10 in the morning and go through to say 2:30 or so. So today we're in the summertime, the summer months, so we're in a little shortened workshop. So without further ado, I would like to call on Mr. Widener to get us started.
Okay. Good afternoon, board members. What we're going to do today is go over the capital budget. And I've put together a multiple year on the major projects so you can see what the total cost is, the ones that we're finishing up per se. And these are preliminary numbers. The actual tentative budget that will come forth on July 29th, I can tell you these numbers will change, because we'll have the actual certified tax roll. Right now we just have what they call a preliminary tax roll number that indicates from the final tax roll for 2013 it went up about 7.1%. So these numbers will change. The other thing that'll change is as of June 30th, we'll see exactly what we have spent on the projects, and I'll be rolling forward, those balances per se. So with that said, the revenue assumptions that we've used on this particular capital budget is that the sales tax revenues will increase based on past fiscal year about 6%. As I already stated, the tax roll going up by the 7.1%. Impact fees, of course, are a very minor amount, and they're actually in abeyance, but every now and then we are still collecting a little bit. So we do have a little bit of impact fee money in there. The public education capital outlay funds, for the last 2 years, school districts have not received anything for the maintenance allocation. This year, the legislature did put in an amount of money for the maintenance allocation for school districts, and I do not have a computation of what that is right now, so I left it out on the revenue side. But basically what will happen is, whatever that number is, let's say it's just $1 million or whatever, I will offset the transfer from the millage fund because we use the money for the exact same purposes. So that'll help the 1.5 mil fund have a little bit extra money based when we find out what our PICO distribution is. And of course, also through the PICO distribution, we've received $3 million that'll is earmarked for the Northport SCTI project. And I might mention about that, those funds have to be encumbered by February 1st of 2017. If they're not encumbered by then, the state goes back to, or the money goes back to the state. So I just thought I'd mention that. We do have a small amount of money that comes in from what they call capital outlay debt service. We use that for re-roofing projects. It's only about $250,000. It's not a major dollar amount. And in here in the appropriations, when you look at what I have in here for the departments, those are what the departments have given me as to what they need for their yearly dollar amounts. And I do have a 5-year projection in here. The one thing to remember is when you're approving the budget, you're only approving 2014-15. This is just to give you a long-range projection as to the monies we have carrying forward and the dollar amounts that would be available for those other major projects. So with that said, the table that I have on page 1 here, this has the major capital projects that are in progress right now, and also those that are being recommended for funding in the 14-15 fiscal year. The Bay Haven Cafeteria Art Music, that actually began this fiscal year, and the major amount of that money has been encumbered and spent, and that project is underway, and currently the budget for that is $9.2 million. The Booker High rebuild, that actually began back in 2008-9, and of course included in there was the rerouting of the road, Orange Avenue, that went through there, and now it goes around instead of right through the middle of the campus. And I did highlight that rerouting of the road was $1.2 million, and that is included in the total budget of $58,242,000. And at this point in time, balance remaining of $1.4 million. And there may be some of that will be, when the project is finally done, may be available to roll back into other projects. The Booker Middle HVAC project, that began in 2012-13. Of course, a multiple-year project and $9.3 million budget. And you can see the major amount has been spent and encumbered with just a balance of $47,000. The Classrooms of Tomorrow, which began the summer of 2012. This excludes the grant funds. You know, we received quite a bit of money from the Gulf Coast Foundation, but as far as what we committed to the project, it's $1.8 million. The Fruitvale Classroom Wing, of course, that's actually going to begin in 2014-15, so it's got a budget of $7 million with nothing being spent as of today. The Laurel Nokomis HVAC project, that actually began back in 2011-12, and that had a final completion amount of $9.7 million. So, and then the Pineview HVAC renovation, and that's also going to have some science classrooms and so forth. For this 14-15, there's $4 million going into that. And when we get to another table, you'll see the additional dollars coming in for the out years on that. South County Technical Institute rebuild, that one actually began all the way back in 2005-06. It has a current budget year to date from that whole time of $75.9 million. We still have a remaining balance of $2.9 million, which I know part of that will be unexpended and will go back into fund balance.
I have a question about that.
Oh, I'm sorry. Sir, yeah, the North County.
The buildings that are being removed from the old part of the campus, and then the athletic fields that are being built there. What is the situation with those?
The vertical construction on that campus is done. Mm-hmm. What's underway right now are the baseball and softball fields that will support ultimately Riverview High School. All of the vertical construction, even associated with the ball fields, is done. Things like dugouts and press boxes and those kinds of things. It's mostly site left to do. I talked to the project manager yesterday. Our expectation is that Riverview will actually play their regular season games for the 2015 baseball season on those fields.
Thank you.
Well, I don't know. And part of what that means is, right now we're renting from the county Field 5, from the county and the Orioles, and so we won't have to extend that lease. We'll turn the ball fields over to Riverview late fall, early winter. I just don't know if the fields will be ready to practice on, because you need to let the fields themselves kind of germinate. Right. But they'll sure play their home games for 2015 at SCTI.
Good.
Okay, continuing on, the Sarasota High rebuild, which actually the process began back in the 11-12 year, currently has a budget of $40.3 million, with the bulk of it being encumbered and spent right now, with a balance of $2.9 or almost $3 million sitting there right now. The Sarasota Middle HVAC project, That began back in 2010-11. That is totally completed, and that came in at $9.7 million, very, very close to what the Laurel and Nokomis one did. Then we have the Sarasota County Technical Institute Northport, and we currently have a budget for that of $9.5 million, and this is just for Phase 1 and a portion of Phase 3, and they'll talk more at length about that after my presentation.
Understand, though, that $9.5 million includes about $1.5 million for the purchase of property, so the design, construction, and equipping of the school is closer to $8 million in the first phase.
And the other thing I'll mention about that project is this project will use the balance of all impact fee money. So the impact fee money is really what's going to be buying the land, and then whatever's left will be used in construction. So you will have no impact fees left other than new impact fee money once this project gets underway.
And we have suspended impact fees until December?
Through the end of the year.
Through the end of the year. Okay, then we have the South County Bus Depot that started this year, and it's now complete, and it came in at $2.4 million. And then the Venice rebuild, which began back in 08-09, and that we have a current budget of $88.4 million, with $87.8 being spent and $567,000 left. One thing I didn't highlight because it's printed here, but as the projects were being built, I indicated in the verbiage how much we then transferred out of the original budget because we came in much better than the original budget in these large rebuilds. Then what I did was I gave you a table of the major capital projects.
Before we go, I have a question on what we've talked about. Because those projects had been coming in, I see we transferred the $2 million from Venice and $3.8 from SETI into the Sarasota High rebuilds. Are we seeing that trend coming to an end now where the projects are coming in below what we've estimated, because we've either adjusted our cost or because costs are ramping back up?
I'm going to defer to Scott on that one.
What everything that the industry is telling us today is a combination of a couple things, really. Availability of raw materials. There's more demand as both residential and commercial construction kind of turn around a little bit. So the cost of raw materials is going up a little bit. The other thing we're noticing is during the economic downturn, firms left Sarasota. And so when a general contractor tries to sub out a particular trade, they're finding that there are fewer companies that are willing to bid on whatever that work is. And that lack of competition obviously then drives up costs. The estimates that we're hearing as you build your inflation factors in the out years to plan on somewhere between 3% and 7% a year increase in overall construction costs.
I guess that just goes back to, what a good decision it was for y'all to come to us and ask us to do those funds to get those buildings done when. The other thing is we talked about using up the impact fees, and I would imagine that's going to be coming back to us, whether we're going to extend that or not. I like that discussion to include the impact that charter schools have. I mean, aren't we only allowed to build so many student stations? And when we're looking at overall student stations, we have to look at those student stations in charter schools too, or, how will that affect us when we're looking at, when we're going to look at that impact fee again? I'd like to have that whole discussion included in that if we could.
And the COFTI in terms of those student stations will drive our ability to build new sites, and you are limited in the use of impact fees. But also keep in mind that if you were to reconsider the application of impact fees, you would have to do another study. Times are very different since the last time, so there would need to be some upfront investment in that study to determine what would be legally, what you would legally be able to do. So and my feeling is before we would take that step, I need to know, is the board going to consider it? Because there is no need to do a study that will be sitting on a shelf for the next time that it's considered, because then it would become perhaps out of date again. So
Okay.
I think it's probably a conversation that has to be held by the board at some point, so we have some direction as staff.
Well, I know there's some talk in the papers, we don't have impact fees, but, our hands are kind of tied in how we can use them also, and that if there's, every time a new charter school comes up, then they're saying, the school says, well, you've got
Right. You would you would be demonstrating less need for those student stations as students go towards either charter schools or virtual schools. Whatever wouldn't require additional student stations in the traditional public schools.
Well, yeah. Well, hopefully that's all part of that conversation when we discuss it. Thank you,
Mr. Kovach.
Al, just a quick question. When you in the left hand under the project, when you're talking about, for instance, the SCTI rebuild, the $3.8 million transfer from the original budget, does that mean that the budget number we're seeing, the 75.9, has already had that taken out?
Correct.
Okay, that's the way I read it, but I want to make sure. Okay,
yeah, it's been reduced. Correct.
It's interesting you picked that project. If you remember, it was, almost 10 years ago now, but when you had your first presentation, Schinkel Schultz brought a kind of a concept to you, and we asked them to give you a range of budget, and the top end of that range was almost $200 million. So to be able to talk about completing, and I still have it if anybody wanted to see it, but to be able to talk about completing that project for under $75 million is incredible. We never would have thought this. Back to your comment about doing it when construction prices were down.
Okay. Then I've provided you a table with a budget for 2015-16 through 2018-19 and the dollars that are in each year for those projects. Now, I'm not going to read every one line by line. The one thing to remember, however, is as things evolve, you may see that we may move something from one year to another based on the needs, especially since the Sarasota Technical Institute down in Northport is still, being designed, you might say. So I just give you, this is how the money is in there right now, but this is not in concrete at all. In fact, this is in sand. I'll put it that way. And there could be a sandstorm at any moment. Wet. So anyway, with that, going on to page 3, I thought it'd be interesting to give you a from 2012-13 actual amounts spent, and then 2013-14 what we're projecting to spend based on operations through June 9th of this year, and then the budget for 14-15. I'll just highlight some that have some changes. The first one, the transfer to debt service for the COPS, the Qualified School Construction Bonds and Leases. The major reason for the 2014-15 increase is because of the computer refresh program. We're going to, instead of having it over a 5-year period of time, it's going to be a 4-year. So that means the lease payments will go up approximately $2 million. So I just thought I'd mention that one. The transfer to the general fund, you can see that stays pretty well flat. In fact, actually went down some. Then I'll explain on the construction services, salaries and non-salaries. You can see in 12-13 it says we actually spent $2 million in that area. And this year we're projecting $3.3 million and then $3.5 for 14-15. What happens within this particular line item is the project managers, their original salary budget is in the construction services area. However, each payroll, if they're working on, let's say, Booker High or Venice or whatever, their salary is then charged to those projects. So from a budgeting standpoint, we put it all in one place, but then during the year and as things are and they're working on these major projects, their salaries are then charged to those projects. So just thought I'd highlight that since you can see it. It looks like it's going up there. It's really staying flat, and but it's just the way in which the accounting happens where they end up getting charged. The equipment we just have a small line item for food service and what we call central departments. And I indicated why 1213 is the way it is. It's because we had an equipment capitalize an equipment lease for the print shop, which is $1 million. So that's why 1213 looks much higher than the other years. But we put a minimal amount in there for some equipment replacements that departments may need, and roughly $100,000 of that goes actually to food service for their equipment. Facility services, that's their total capital budget, which is for re-roofing, painting, carpeting, remodeling. You can see that they actually spent in 12-13 5.3, almost 5.4. This year we're projecting about $7 million, and then in 14-15 about $8 million in that line item. Safety and security. You can see that has went up, and a lot of that's because of decisions to make sure we do additional fencing and cameras and so forth. So that's been a deliberate, and I know that was talked about at our February workshop. So that reflects exactly what was talked about then. Your information services technology projects. Again, we had to capitalize the what we call the computer replenishment program. In 1213, it's an accounting item that we have to do under governmental accounting, and so that we had to capitalize roughly $7 million. So that's why you see 1213 at 10.8, and then the other years at 6.8, and then 7.5. So, and then charter school payments. This is the amount that we give them for the 1.5 mil. And in 12-13, it was 2.1. This year, I'm estimating about $2 million. And for 14-15, 2.5. Now, I will explain to you that 14-15, it is up some because of the new charter, Sarasota Military Prep. But also, we allow our charters to carry forward unexpended funds in this area. And a lot of our charters will, if they know they've got a big project, like a re-roofing or something, they'll, use multiple years to carry forward to pay for it. One example also was when Sarasota Arts and Sciences rebuilt their complex. They accumulated money so they'd have enough money for the equipment replacement that they needed. So that I just thought I'd mention that since it shows the charter school payments for next year to $2.5 million. So you can see that total transfers and departments and what we call recurring expenses for 12-13 were 70.6.6. This year we're projecting 74.3, and then 14-15 at 80.9 million. So and then you get into the actual details of everything. And with that, I see I have a question.
Yes. You've started to break out the transfer charter schools. Is there any way that, in the future, that transfer to the general fund for maintenance, we could break out what is ours versus what is the pass-through from the state to the charter schools, so that we could, the amount going to charter schools is getting more every year. So if we could say every year, so we could easily say, well, this is what our budget is, and this is what we're giving to charter schools. And I understand there's going to be, other dollars that are going to be pass-throughs. If we could keep those dollars that are pass-through separately, so we know which ones we're touching and which ones are just going through us.
Right. And the amount that will be a pass-through next year will be about 75% at what it was this year because the amount went down. But yes, I have that, and that's no big deal for me to do as a separate line item. So when I bring this back for the tentative budget, I can have that separated out so you can see exactly what it is. The other thing about the state money, that only goes to charter schools that have been in operation or successful operation for 3 years. And they've had no audit problems as far as any financial findings and so forth. So, because this coming year, next year, that for the flow through, our Sky Academy in Venice. Next year will be their first year that they'll qualify for it. So it used to be, on charter schools, they had quite a large startup grant dollar amount, which they don't get any longer. It's now competitive, and it's nowhere near the dollar amount that used to go, just as a side note on charter schools. And then on the very detailed pages, I've given you a breakdown of the 2013-14, what I call projected actual based on June 9th, 2014, and then our 14-15 projected budget, and then the out years going through 2018-19. Instead of me just going through, I don't want to really go through every line item unless you'd like me to, which I don't think you want me to. But anyway, since you did receive this on Thursday, are there any line items that anybody has any questions that I could highlight? Anything or?
Mine's really more clarification. Obviously, 13-14 is a much higher number, and that's obviously because we're finishing up some major projects that we had rolled over some funding, just to clarify.
Right. That's 100% right. It's carrying forward that fund balance. Right.
Any other questions?
If there's no other, I'll turn it over and I'll leave my seat here and let our astound Dr. Todd come.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Widener. I look forward to discussing those legislative updates with you.
Madam Chair, before we move on to South County SCTI, could I just highlight a couple of things that I think are significant in terms of what this budget buys you?
Yes, please.
Okay, and I'll try not to be redundant because I think Al hit on some of the keys, but as I reflect on kind of what this budget has done for you in the 13-14 year and looking forward, Al hit on a couple of key things. Sarasota Middle School and Laurel Nokomis, those projects are both done. If you haven't been on those campuses lately, walk through the front door. They just feel entirely different. I think the principals are proud. Probably more importantly is the instructional spaces are now fresh and clean and cool, and so big home runs there. We talked a little bit about Booker High School already. Booker High School is done. We have no physical presence on that campus anymore. We're still going through some punch list things, but the campus is effectively done, and you won't see construction trailers or those kinds of things there anymore. Al mentioned South County Transportation. Just as a reminder to the board, that's something that we started really in response to an MGT recommendation that said you spend a lot of money on deadhead miles, find a way to push down on that. As we looked at deadhead miles, by the way, defined are the distance between where the bus is stored and the first stop and then the last stop back to the compound. We saw our biggest problem was in Northport. You saw that our investment down there was just over $2 million, and we have every confidence that we'll save on the general fund side somewhere between $300,000 and $400,000 a year in fuel, bus maintenance, and driver time. So that puts you conservatively a 7-year payback, best case a 5-year payback, so money well spent. We're also working an agreement with Sarasota County government right now for them to park some SCAT buses on that same site and buy fuel through us. That doesn't save the school board any money, but it certainly represents good government in terms of us just working together and hold down the cost to the taxpayer of buses. Completed this year or the coming year, Booker Middle HVAC. This summer will be the last phase, so you'll see some activity at Booker Middle School this year. But when kids come back in August, our presence on that campus will be complete as well. Al also mentioned Venice High School. The Performing Arts Center is the final vertical construction phase of that campus. I was on it last week, actually. I continue to tell people that walk through the admin doors into the courtyard of Booker High School. It is the most beautiful campus in our district. Venice is going to give them a run for their money, at least in terms of driving up the the first impression of the campus. The instructional spaces of the Performing Arts Center are done. We're moving furniture in now with the intention of kids actually going to school in the instructional spaces of that building in August. The Performing Arts Center itself is a little behind, although I will tell you that the Symphony has already sold 1,000 tickets for their early November performance. So we have a real hard timeline for opening that thing up. We have created a joint advisory board, as your interlocal agreement would suggest, that includes, among others, Jack Turgeon, the principal, and the JAB is working on what the grand opening will look like. But just know that there's going to be a big deal grand opening when Venice High is done. Some tennis courts and some site work, and we will be complete. And my expectations will be off that campus by the end of this calendar year, by December of 2014. We'll be off that campus. We already talked about SCTI, so I won't relive that. Sarasota High, the two big things that are underway right now, Sarasota High School and Pineview. Sarasota High School is underway. Building 4 is the first phase. That's the Rudolph building that kind of runs parallel to Bay Vista Road. Our plan is to have that done and move kids in at the winter break of this coming school year, and that's the first of 3 phases on that campus. And then at Bayhaven, you should see architect's been selected, CM has been selected, and you should see dirt start to move this summer. First phase will be to get the parking lot out of the way so that we can build the new cafeteria. So you should see those underway this summer. And then new, as Al mentioned, for 14 and 15, Pineview and Fruitville are the 2 projects that you'll formally vote on for the 14-15 budget. That would be the new projects for this year.
I had a call from a realtor yesterday about some land adjacent to Bayhaven that will be coming on the market for sale. It's about an acre. And I forwarded that to our new person in long-range planning to discuss that. I know at one time we were looking for adjacent because they've had such a small footprint on that campus, but I don't know that we're...
The real challenge we have is the campus is landlocked by city roads. When we were looking for property and actually bought some, it was that parking lot between 41 and the Circle. We actually wanted to make that parking lot a little bit bigger and push it to the north. So I'll be interested in what's for sale. I don't think there's much residentially around it that will do us any good. But expanding that parking lot, it's worth taking.
There's a residence, a guest house on a lot, and a restaurant, I guess. So it's
I know exactly
an acre.
Yeah, north of our parking lot.
Mrs. Zucker.
I'd like to know, I heard that we're buying some land for Fruitville Elementary.
Yes, ma'am.
Where is it situated? I drive by there all the time.
Sure, and that is included in the project budget. I think what Al said is the project budget is $7 million. That includes the cost of that land. If you were going north on Honore and you go just past the school, you take I think the road is called Sawgrass, I think. Take a right. There's kind of a big church on the north side, but then you pass the school, the security trailer, and the bus loop, and then there's a little teeny-weeny church that sits back in there just on the south side of Sawgrass Road. It's that piece of property. The reason we were buying that is really 2 or 3-fold. We need access to the campus, and right now there's no way to get access. You need a construction laydown place to build the building, and then it will give us the opportunity to expand Dr. Kingsley's bus loop. If you ever go up there at Dismissal, her bus loop is too small to fit buses, so there's all kinds of traffic issues pretty close to a main intersection. So being able to extend that bus loop into what is now that church property will get some of those buses off the road.
Every time I drove by, I was trying to figure out where in the world you were buying, what piece of land you were buying, so I'm glad to know.
I can take you out there if you like. A teeny tiny little, the church itself is a teeny tiny little building. It's kind of an off yellow almost color, I think. If you walk past it, the next thing you see is the stormwater pond for Fruitville, if that gives you kind of a frame of reference.
Yeah, I got it. Okay. Thank you.
Let's see, where was I? Some other things that are unrelated to construction, but just so you're aware of in terms of the things that this budget for 14-15 buys you, we are accelerating the computer replacement project, formerly known as the computer refresh. Replenishment. So pick your pleasure. The refresh model right now is 5 years for about $1.5 million a year. We talked about that the last time we talked about capital budget. It allows us to accelerate that replacement project and really kind of keep up with technology. The other thing it does is begins the replacement cycle for classroom projection technologies. And I read that the active board, or what is the replacement for the active board, next generation active board, or like technology. That's in this budget. 6 schools are going to get touched this year in terms of computer replacement. Riverview High School, Booker High School, McIntosh Middle, Booker Middle, and then 6 elementary schools. So really, really busy summer for Linda Seibel, who kind of oversees all of that stuff. We're going to buy about 25 buses. Now, we've kind of set as the oldest age we'd like our buses to be on the road, around 13 or 14 years old. So if we buy about 25 each year, so that $3+ million line item you see in there for transportation is to allow us to stay kind of on that glide slope. It'll continue to help us push down on our reliance in portables. This summer, for example, we will remove all of the portables that Dr. Bowden used to use on the Indian Hill site in Venice. We have moved them onto the campus of Venice High. So the only thing left on that site will be South County Triad. So we'll take down all the rest of those portables, and I know Todd will miss them.
Mrs. Zucker.
Is there, I know you're getting rid of the portables, is there any portable that can be moved to the Northport High School? Because I know that David Jones is looking for a portable there.
Portable inventory is not our problem. We have portables, and in fact, we have some that we don't need, but are too new to demolish. We bought them at the point where the school board's enrollment was going like this. So enrollment's not our problem, and if they have a need, I'm unaware of that, but if they have a need, their enrollment, that would surprise me a bit because their enrollment's down probably 500 from their, I'll talk to David.
That's what I was going to say, because it's not just for student stations, it's for something else that he wants to do.
And there's also Rotary Futures, which we have discussed more and more as being a great thing for Northport High School. At one time they had the software there and so forth, but they were always saying they had no office space. So I was thinking that might be an excellent alternative to them, because the school that really needs help with scholarships and that sort of thing more than anything else is Northport High School, according to what I've heard in the community.
Sure. I'll take that as a due out to you. Preservation of assets. There's a lot going on. You see a little blip in the facilities budget that their expenditures, particularly as it relates to renovation, is going up a little bit. Part of that is because we identified a handful of buildings with the highest facility condition indices, and we said let's do those within the facilities department rather than outsource them to a general contractor. So this year we're going to look to renovate the Butterfly building at Alta Vista, Building 2, the one with the roof that the kids skate on if they can get on the roof. And then we'll start over a series of years to renovate some of the buildings at Inglewood Elementary, beginning this year with Building 4. So when you look at that little blip in the renovation part of Jody's budget, it's really to respond to those kinds of things. Thermal storage. We have one more thermal storage project in the 14-15 budget. That is Cranberry Elementary School. In fact, I just sent Frank some pictures of the thermal storage project at Oak Park, which is the one going on now. I wanted to share a couple of numbers with you as to why we do thermal storage, and I got these from our energy manager, Alicia Burris. We compared Tatum Ridge Elementary School to Cranberry Elementary School because they're really similar facilities. Tatum is a little bit bigger, but a very similar facility. Tatum has thermal storage, has ice, and Cranberry does not. When I look at their kind of the cost of their electric bill, forgive me as I get old here, cost per square foot of floor space at the two schools, Cranberry Elementary last year for 13-14 was $1.24 a square foot. Tatum was 96 cents a square foot. That difference doesn't sound like much, but those schools are 100,000 square feet. So when you look at their raw electric bills, Cranberry's electric bill was right at $148,000 last year. Tatum was $110,000. A $38,000 difference in a school that's a little bit bigger, and I attribute almost all of that difference to the power of thermal storage. So know that we continue to do it. We use rebate money when we can to move those projects forward because it just has a huge impact on the operating cost of those facilities. The other thing it does for us, by the way, is redundancy. If we lose a chiller and you've made enough ice at night and kids are in school and the chiller goes down, no big deal. You just start to burn ice, you pump that cold water into the buildings, and they have air conditioning all the time, and you don't have to worry about the fact that you lost a chiller. So redundancy is powerful, too.
How many of those do we have now?
Every school in the district, save, I think, 3. Mm-hmm. Those 3 are Cranberry Elementary School, which is scheduled for 14-15, Taylor Ranch, and Bay Haven. And I'll tell you, I don't think we'll ever get to Bay Haven. 2 big reasons. Number one, the footprint's just too small. If you've seen those tanks, they're this big around, takes 10 or 12 of them, so the footprint of the thermal storage yard is big. The second challenge we have at Bay Haven is the chiller plant is right on the far south side of the campus. Right immediately across the street are homes. And the way we save money there is running the chillers at night. And I'm not sure that you're going to win a popularity contest in North Sarasota if you're burning a chiller at 2 o'clock in the morning. So Bay Haven may be the one school that we just recognize it just isn't practical to do. More than you wanted to know, probably. And then I guess the last thing I wanted to mention is this budget, as Al suggested, adds $1 million to safety and security. That's as a result of our last discussion about the capital budget. That money is going to allow us to do a number of things, accelerate the infrastructure that supports things like our cameras at all of our schools. We're actually going to put a deliberate evacuation chair in every school that has more than one story. So if you lose your elevator and you have a handicapped or wheelchair-bound person, there's a way to get them safely out of the building. And then we'll begin to focus on access control and single-point entry at schools like Garden and Brentwood, where you have deliberate fencing that forces you into an office, but the office itself is pretty open. So we think there are some things we can do to better control access, and we'll use that that money to do those kinds of things. A fair amount of it spent on fencing, with Goshio being the biggest and probably most expensive project for the 14-15 year. And I guess the final thing I'd like to mention before we talk about Northport SCTI, there are 3 things that are not in this budget that as you look at the amount of money available for competing projects, just kind of keep in mind. Thing number 1 is Sarasota High School. In the 11 years that I've worked for the school board, I've never had to say to the board we have a project over budget, but Sarasota High will be. My guess is it will be over budget by about $2 million. I blame the vast majority of that on asbestos abatement. We budgeted in the project about $800,000 to abate asbestos from buildings 4 and 5. We're done with that on building 4 today, and we're about $1.6 million into just asbestos abatement. And if you want to see an amazing amount of work, let me know. And in fact, we had the superintendent gave us the pleasure of letting us take her through, and she saw kind of what they were doing up there. But we found asbestos in the stucco. And that building has stucco on the entire exterior, all those double-loaded corridors that are in the middle, and all those great big sunshades. And they're taking it off with a hammer and a chisel. And then having to repair the concrete and go back up with a finish that makes it look like Paul Rudolph designed it. So we're about $1.6 million into building 4. Building 5, the Rudolph Gym, the West Gym, is going to cost us probably another $500,000. We almost need to get in there and see it. But those 2 things are going to cause us to bust that budget. And so at some point we will formally be asking to amend the budget for Sarasota.
And we all know that with construction projects in a reno phase, you never know what you're going to get into. So you always have to figure 20% at best will be used above whatever your budget is because of things and unplanned consequences. So
sure,
it could have been worse.
It could have, we try to do that on all these projects. In fact, the $800,000 for asbestos abatement initially, we thought that's a lot of money because you don't think about finding it in stucco, especially on a building that has so much stucco. So the second thing, and it's a small item, but just be aware of it, I've had a number of conversations with Leanne McIntyre. The equipment in the control room for this complex is aging. And so what I've asked Leanne to do is to build a 5-year budget that looks at the kind of the useful life of this equipment and then phases the replacement of that equipment over time. In the context of a major construction project, it's a small amount of money, but I think it's probably in our best interest to add a line that says we need to keep pace with the useful life of that equipment that you use to project your board meetings. You look like you were going to say something.
Well, I'm concerned a bit, too, that we look at technology and look at it from a technology perspective and maybe from a consultant because things are changing so drastically. And, it would be really nice if we had the ability of taking something from a cell phone and flashing it on a screen and doing some of the new technologies that I think are out there. But those are nice to do, but I think there's a whole new level of things that are being done in boardrooms, and we really need to, if we're going to do this, we want to make sure that we don't just patch or don't just fix what we've got, because there have been some issues with it all the time. So we want to make sure that we spend our money wisely and with technology futures in mind.
One of the examples is projecting in HD. I think the industry is going that way, and there's going to come a time when you won't be able to buy equipment that's not HD. So do we move in that direction now? So we are working, just so you know, we're working with Blackwater and Command Corps to look at the manufacturer's useful lives and what the options are. So it isn't just your education channel staff. We have the professionals. In fact, they were here. I don't know if Leanne's around late last week. I think we actually spent some time with them. So good. And then the last thing is, in a good transition to the conversation about SCTI Northport, 2 pieces of that project that are not in the current budget, the $8 million plus the property. One is the school board's share of a joint use library. If the county were to come to us and say, we're ready to do this joint use library thing and do it in 14-15, the money in the budget is for Phase 1 SCTI, not for joint use library. And I would tell you, if you look at the amount of money that's available for competing projects, it's there. It's just sitting in fund balance. So if you decided you wanted us to do that, the money is there. So don't feel like we need to reprioritize projects, because we don't. There's excess fund balance that would allow us to do that. But just know it's not in that estimate. And then the second is, when we got to a point, and Dr. Bowden will talk to you about kind of his thoughts on Phase 2, but when we get to a point where we say we're ready now to do Phase 2, we have a $4 million wedge sitting out, I think, in year 4 of the 5-year plan. $4 million is not enough money to do Phase 2. So we would need to talk about where does the money come from if Phase 2 of SCTI was a priority. So those are the three things: Sarasota High's overrun, the control room at the landings, and those two pieces of SCTI Northport that are not in this budget.
Have we got a memorandum of understanding with the county now as to who's on first, second, and third with this project?
No.
I know at one point in time we projected a library in another school in Northport, and we spent quite a bit of money, and it didn't come to fruition, and we were out of pocket some of that money, and I don't want to see that happen again, but we need to work diligently with them because their library was out about, 10 years, and we will need more parking and other things because people that go to libraries want to get in and out, and so we really need to thoughtfully have some discussions with them soon.
Absolutely agree. I think the short answer to your question is no. We do not have an MOU yet, although I don't read that as a lack of willingness on the part of staff or the commission. Mm-hmm. I think what they're waiting for from us, and I guess if you put yourself in their position, you would too, is give us some feel for the scope of this project and probably most importantly what it's going to cost us.
Right.
So the exercise we're kind of going through now, and chime in here, Todd, if you like, the exercise we're going through now is Todd will kind of define his facility list. These are the things that I need to have an effective, efficient library as part of SCTI. We would then share that with Sarah Beth Kalajian from libraries, and she would then look at it, and we would say all this is shareable space. So Todd says I need a conference room, I need a computer lab or two, and I need circulation space of X. We would then say to Sarah Beth, all of that is available for joint use for the citizens of Northport. She would then look at that and say, okay, what I need in addition are these things. We would then build a construction estimate on those things. And I think what the commission is waiting for is what does that look like? Mm-hmm. Because what they're going to need to do, I think, is reprioritize their capital budget a little bit too. And you really need to know what's the bogey? How much money are we talking about? So.
Mrs. Zucker.
I would like us to not move further until we know exactly what it is we're looking at for that library. Because I don't want to get stuck again.
Well, and so you know there, I didn't mean to, if I cut you off, I apologize.
It's okay.
We have some time here because we thought one of the things you'd want to talk about today is time. We have some time here because we don't yet own the piece of property, so it's not like we're going to go into design tomorrow. We need to buy the piece of property. The piece of property that we're looking at is in the Toledo Blade corridor, has been foreclosed upon, and so we're working with the bank on how do we make this attractive for you. Our long-range planning team is saying to the bank, we don't want the whole piece of property, but we will help you work with the city of Northport to subdivide it. So we're going to have to go through a master plan and platting process with the city that's going to take some time. So I think we have some time to do all of those kinds of things and get a more formal commitment before we have to worry about awarding a contract. And
that is land that we really want, that we're willing to wait that time for, and the added expense that will be involved in doing this. I mean, will that cost us a lot to do these things?
No, it will cost us some, but it won't cost us a lot. One of the probably the most time-consuming piece is just getting through the bureaucracy and I don't mean that negative, just a matter of fact, the bureaucracy of what we need to do with the city of Northport to replat the property. There are small expenses associated with that, but they're in the $15,000, $18,000 range, not hundreds of thousands of dollars. What it does, though, is it makes the sale of the property more attractive to the bank at the price we're willing to offer and encourages them to sell us less than the full parcel. I think what's for sale, and don't hold me exactly to the numbers, but it's about 35 acres. We figure we can, depending on how this sites, we can get by with somewhere between 20 and 25. So at $50,000 an acre, it doesn't make sense to buy 10 or 15 acres more than you need. Yeah. So if we can do a little bit of investment to help the bank subdivide the property, we think that's in the board's best interest.
Mrs. Brown.
Well, I just want to say it's almost, we've been talking about South County SCTI for years, and it was in December or January we had that meeting, with the Sarasota County and the city of Northport, and they were saying that this is their priority. And I'm like, well, priorities to the legislature had already passed. But I said, well, you know what? Maybe we ought to ask. And in talking with Senator Dietert, she was saying how excited the governor's office was and the Department of Education was because they haven't had a brand new technical school built in the state of Florida for over 10 years. And so they were really excited that somebody was willing to go ahead and build that. And so you want to, Senator Dietert's help in that, and I know you were up there. And I know our chairwoman, Jane Goodwin, did a lot of work that we couldn't help her with because we couldn't talk to her about it.
Stayed up late at night.
And I want to thank you for that and give credit where credit was due in Tallahassee for helping us with that $3 million to get this project rolling. Of course, that's going to be a small amount for what the whole building is going to be, but
there's some significance in that. Again, I apologize for cutting you off. One of the differences between Woodland, which is the school you were referring to before, Jane, one of the differences is that $3 million, while it's not written this way in the law, I think everybody sees as $2 million associated with closing the deal on SCTI and $1 million towards the library. So I think if we started to spend money relative to a joint use library, there's $1 million in the board's budget that looks a little bit like, and that's not the right way to say it, but it looks a little bit like library money. So I think we could decrement that on some of our expenses if we had to do that.
Okay.
So we have a little bit more cushion or cover than we did with the previous project.
I'd also like to speak to your prior question about the parceling of sites. I think it's significant that the top 3 sites from the site selection process would have required parceling.
Okay, that was really my question. Yep. And I don't know which parcel, don't need to know which parcel. None of us do. We want you to be able to negotiate that well, and it's not important for us to know, but that is an important consideration. Mrs. Brown. Oh, I thought you.
Waving my fingers, I guess. Well, it's a good assumption. I mean, the chances were.
Yeah, chances are very good.
Show me.
Please.
So, Ms. Brown, I think your comments are spot on. In the last 2 weeks, we have received a governor's signature on a budget, which has taken us from a dream and a vision to a viable project. So it is the appropriate time to stop and thank some folks. And certainly a good place to start is Senator Dietert for spearheading that effort in Tallahassee. But certainly there are some folks here in this room, including our board chair and superintendent, who spent a lot of time and certainly, I've learned a lot in this last legislative session that when you have an allocation pending, that there are requests that come, and they come with about 15 seconds of notice of, can you provide me this and can you do that? So it was interesting watching that allocation work its way through the session. But this is the first time that this board has come together since the governor has signed the budget. So I think it's appropriate to start with a thank you, both locally to our legislative delegation and to the governor's office for seeing the wisdom of us building in Northport. What we're proposing in Northport is a 3-phased project. Phase 1 would be the base for a technical center to include the site and administrative functions and about the first half of our proposed programs. The second phase would be the build out of our programs. And then the third phase, as we refer to it, is the joint use library. So I guess our objective would be to build phases 1 and 3 together, but as you hear us refer to a 3-phase project, it's 2 phases from the board's perspective and a third phase that would be dependent on Sarasota County's willingness to build on our timeline. So where we are in that process, we have completed site selection, have honed in on a site. We have money in the bank now, and so we've started to put some timelines together and done an initial survey of what the programs would look like on that campus. We've received a lot of assistance, and it will be ongoing from the Northport EDC. What I've proposed is I know that we're going to have a broad range of programs on that campus. I know that we're going to have healthcare, we're going to have industrial education, we're going to do something in support of our manufacturers, we're going to have business education programs. But as we sit here today, I can't tell you which healthcare programs or which business education programs. And so those programs have a like footprint, and it's enough information to get folks like Scott Limpy underway, but we'll have conversations over the coming months to hone in exactly what those programs will be. But the best way to describe what we're proposing is a full-service technical center. I think there's enough geographic separation that you can duplicate some programs. Certainly practical nursing comes to mind. There's demand for practical nursing. We accept about 1 out of every 3 applicants at our main campus, and so I believe you can support some duplication there. But there's also an opportunity to implement some unique programs. And as we look at program offerings, Charlotte Technical Institute will also play a role in that. That as we look at programs, we're going to look at their program offerings to see where they have wait lists, to see where they have programs that are not full, and work together with them to meet that need. As we like to say, technical centers don't compete at a school level, but more at a program level. So we'll make sure that we're making good use of our resources and not duplicating where it's not justified.
Dr. Bowden,
Yes.
You might mention, too, that this, and most technical centers or most new startup schools would require 3-year accreditation.
Yes.
And we do not have to do that with this center because it is a satellite almost, if you will, of SCTI. Therefore, that gives us a leg up as well from a standpoint of startup.
So it will be accredited from day one, which means that students that attend eligible programs can receive federal Pell Grants to assist them in their studies, which is huge, absolutely. So what you have in front of you today is a really a first blush. It probably should have draft stamped all over it, but there are really 4 functions that are required to get the doors open and serve that first student. The first is the acquisition of a site, which requires parceling. As previously noted, regardless of the site that we selected, it would require parceling. So you have the parceling of the site and then the actual acquisition of that. Staff has convened to look at, there are waiting periods involved. There's mandated times in which projects have to be posted. And so our purpose was to make sure that if we're waiting on one phase, is there something else that we can be doing to double up on that time allocation? So you'll see the timeline includes the parceling and then the site acquisition, and then the 2 distinct functions of the architect and the contractor. The scenario that you have in front of us has us putting a shovel in the ground January 1st of 16, with the idea of conceptually being into the building January 1st of 2017. That is a holiday. We'll go with the 5th then.
And we can start not at the beginning of school year as we would do with a normal school would have to start in August.
Absolutely.
We can start at the first of the year because of and maybe by then we'll have college on the door and other things.
That would be the plan.
Okay. Seems like a long time.
Question. When you say we accept 1 out of every 3 applicants for the health, that's because we don't have room? Or because
correct.
they weren't because we don't have room?
Yes, those seats are regulated by the State Board of Nursing. We have a number of students that we can serve under our license, and so that is the restraint why we haven't expanded that program.
So we'll get additional ones under the license?
Correct. It's a different geographic area. We'll have different hospitals that partner with us in our allocation, and so we'll receive additional seats. Clinical space is what drives that process with the State Board of Nursing.
Mrs. Zucker?
I know what I wanted to ask you. Is there a pocket of funding out there that we have to utilize by a certain time? And are we within that? I can't remember. Is it workforce funding?
Well, the superintendent mentioned that the 2, maybe Al did, that the PICO money that came to us for this project has to be spent by
2007.
It'd be encumbered, right? And that's a key word because I don't see that as a problem.
Okay.
Encumbered means we get a GC on board, we accept the GMP, and we pay them. So, but yes, there's certainly a timeline associated with the PICO money.
Sorry,
There's some timelines at play also with the impact fee money for site acquisition.
Mr. Kovach?
Thank you.
Has it been discussed the possibility of buying the entire parcel and then selling off the parcel that we don't use, and that way speeding up the length of time that it takes to do the parceling?
It hasn't, and I need to think through the pros and cons of that. Either way, you're going to go through part of what I think we can do is the parceling is going to take a long time. If you look at the way the timeline is built, and Lori and I were talking about this morning, if we can get the bank to enter into even a contingent contract that you would act on and they would accept, but it was contingent on having all that stuff with the city of Northport done, I think we could begin the process of selecting our design engineer then. And I don't think we're that far away from, in fact, probably this week, I hope to send what's called a letter of intent to the bank that kind of lays out what we're willing to do and not willing to do to purchase this property. And what that would do is help our attorneys begin to craft the contract. But if we could build those contingencies into a contract and get that signed in the near term, I think we could begin to hire our design team. Then you'd at least have some expectation of what you were designing to. So no, we haven't thought about that. We can talk about it a bit if you like. I don't see that as the long pole in the tent, though, because I think we can overlap the timelines.
Well, I'm just thinking more about it from the bank standpoint. I've done a lot of deals with banks, and they're not always real flexible. So that's why I was saying perhaps if we have to take that leap of faith, if they're just not going to allow us to, go through that whole process, because obviously that means they have to take it off the market for the length of time that we're going through this process. So
it's also
very good point.
I probably shouldn't tell you this because it'll make you more uncomfortable, but it was an FDIC insured loan that was foreclosed upon too. So you've got the involvement, and frankly, I don't know what that looks like, but you've got the involvement of the FDIC in this whole process too. So.
Other questions?
Any other questions? No. Well, I really would like to see this speeded up a bit, if there's any way to speed it up. But then that's just, of course, then we blink an eye, and 2 years goes by?
Yep.
Him too.
Yep.
But I'm really excited about this. I think the people of Northport are very excited about this. A dental program would be great because there is no dental with us or with Charlotte County, I understand, and there are a lot of dentists around. So I think that, I think we've got an excellent opportunity here, and I'm really excited about it.
Jane, final words.
Mrs. Sucker.
We've come a long way from the time when I had to fight to get a high school for Northport. We've come a long way, and now that we're putting a technical institute down there. This is fantastic. It's just like the culmination of a dream, where they have the services in the schools that they need for their community. So this is fantastic.
Well, technical education is so important to our students, and the sooner we can get them involved and the closer to home we can get them in going and getting a certification in something that, oh gosh, maybe they can work their way through college, or oh gosh, maybe they will find that they can make a decent living with that certification, the better off we all are. Any other questions? Goodness, we're almost done at the very right time that we were supposed to be, which would have been 1 o'clock. It was just a couple of minutes out. So thank you. Thank you, Mr. Limpy. Thank you, Dr. Bowden. And this concludes the televised portion of our workshop. We'll now all convene in room 315 across the pond. I'm so pleased.